My name is Maya. I am 34 years old, and my 13-year-old daughter got home from school to find her key did not fit the lock. She sat outside in the freezing rain for 5 hours waiting. When my mother finally stepped outside, she did not offer a towel or an apology. She just looked at my soaking wet child and said, "We have all decided you do not live here anymore." I did not shout or cry. I simply replied that I understood. They had no idea that 3 days later my mother would receive a letter that would destroy her perfect life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. The harsh fluorescent lights of the airport terminal buzzed above me as I pulled my suitcase off the baggage carousel. I was exhausted after a grueling federal audit trip operating on practically zero sleep. That was when my phone started ringing. It was my daughter Chloe. When I answered, I heard her teeth chattering. She was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. "Mom," she gasped, her voice trembling. "I am locked out. My key will not turn and it is pouring rain. I have been sitting on the porch since school let out." I froze, my grip tightening on my phone. "Where is your father?" I asked. "Where is your grandmother?" Before Chloe could answer, I heard the heavy oak front door creak open through the phone speaker. Then came the sharp, dismissive voice of my mother, Patricia. "Stop that incessant crying, Chloe. Go wait on the sidewalk. This house belongs to your Aunt Victoria now, and she does not want muddy footprints on the new hardwood floors." I felt a cold fury wash over me. My mother was standing inside the $1 million home I paid the mortgage on, locking my child out in a winter storm. A notification popped up on my screen. It was a message in our family group chat from my husband, David. I opened it while keeping Chloe on the line. The text read, "Do not come home for Christmas, Maya. We need some space. Victoria and Marcus are taking over the east wing of the house today. Rent a motel or something. We will talk after the holidays." They had planned this. While I was working 80-hour weeks to fund David's failing stockbroker career and my parents' extravagant lifestyle, they had orchestrated a hostile takeover of my own home. Victoria, the golden child who could do no wrong, was moving in with her hedge fund manager husband Marcus, kicking my daughter out into the freezing rain. I did not send a paragraph of angry text or call David to beg for an explanation. I typed exactly one word into the group chat. "Understood." I switched back to the call. "Listen to me, baby," I said, my voice completely calm. "Walk to the end of the driveway. A black car will pick you up in 10 minutes. Get in, and he will bring you to me. Do not speak to your grandmother or father again." I hung up and dialed an executive car service I used for federal cases. "I need a car at my home address immediately," I ordered. "My daughter is waiting outside in the rain. Bring her to the Ritz-Carlton." The driver, an older gentleman named Thomas, picked up the line. "I am 5 minutes away, Miss Maya," he said. I replied, striding out of the airport. "I am just realizing I have spent 10 years funding the lives of ungrateful parasites. I pay for my parents' country club memberships. I pay off the credit card debt my sister Victoria racks up. I even pay the lease on the SUV my husband drives. Today, they locked my child in the rain because they decided I am just a disposable wallet." Thomas sighed. "I have seen how they treat you, Miss Maya. You carry the family on your back, and they treat you like the help. It is time to drop the dead weight." He was right. I had spent my adult life trying to buy their love, believing financial security would earn their respect. I chose forensic accounting because I was good at finding hidden truths, but I had been blind to the truth in my own home. 40 minutes later, I stood in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton waiting for Thomas. When the car pulled up, I rushed out to grab Chloe. She was shivering uncontrollably, her clothes soaked through. I wrapped my winter coat tightly around her trembling shoulders and hurried her up to our suite for a hot shower. Just as Chloe was finally starting to warm up, my cell phone rang. It was the hotel lobby desk. "Miss Maya," the receptionist said hesitantly. "I am sorry to disturb you, but your husband and your mother are down here at the front desk. They are demanding that you come down immediately to hand over the keys to the family SUV. They say you took the spare set and Marcus needs the vehicle for a meeting. I looked at my phone for a long moment, an icy smile spreading across my tired face. They kicked my daughter into the rain, banished me for Christmas, and now had the audacity to track me down just to demand keys to a car I bought. "Tell them I will be right down," I told the receptionist. I hung up the phone and grabbed the spare key fob from my purse. David and Patricia thought they had won. They thought they could discard me and keep my money. They were both about to learn exactly what happens when you decide to cross a senior federal forensic accountant who has absolutely nothing left to lose anymore. The game was finally over. The polished doors of the elevator slid open, revealing the expanse of the Ritz-Carlton lobby. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the marble floors, but the atmosphere turned freezing the moment I stepped out. There, standing near the grand piano and acting as if they owned the building, were my husband David and my mother Patricia. David wore his tailored suit, the one I bought for his birthday when he claimed he needed to look successful. Beside him, my mother clutched her Birkin bag, her posture rigid with disdain. They had positioned themselves in the center of the lobby, guaranteeing maximum visibility. This was not just an ambush. It was a staged public execution designed to break me. I walked toward them, my heels clicking against the stone. I did not rush. I did not shrink away. David noticed me first. His lips curled into that arrogant smirk he used right before delivering bad news. Before I even stopped moving, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slammed them down onto the glass coffee table separating us. The sound echoed sharply, drawing the eyes of nearby guests and hotel staff. "Sign it!" David commanded, his voice deliberately loud so the patrons surrounding us could hear every word. "I am done playing house with a woman who puts her boring corporate job above her own family. I have already emptied the joint accounts, Maya. Every cent is gone. You are nothing but a low-level number cruncher and you leave this marriage with nothing." I stared down at the divorce papers. The black ink was fresh, the legal jargon dense, but the malicious intent was crystal clear. He wanted to break me. He wanted me to beg. My mother stepped forward, perfectly cued to deliver the next blow. She adjusted her silk scarf and looked at me with an expression of pure pity. "You brought this entirely on yourself," Maya Patricia said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "You always were so stubbornly independent. It is unnatural. Look at your sister. Victoria knows how to build a real family. Her husband Marcus is a true visionary, a real financial genius. He just bought Victoria a stunning 70-foot yacht for their anniversary. A yacht, Maya. You should have learned how to keep a man like your sister did instead of hiding behind spreadsheets." The sheer audacity of her statement hung heavy in the luxurious air. Marcus was not a financial genius. Marcus was a corrupt hedge fund manager whose firm had been under intense federal scrutiny for the past 8 months. A federal scrutiny that I, as a senior forensic accountant for the government, was intimately familiar with. My mother and David thought my job consisted of balancing checkbooks and filing tax returns. They never bothered to ask what a forensic audit actually entailed. They simply assumed I was a glorified secretary. I looked directly at David. His chest was puffed out, reveling in the public humiliation he mistakenly thought he was inflicting. He expected messy tears. He expected a dramatic breakdown right here in the lobby. He expected me to fall to my knees and plead for my home, my money, and my broken marriage. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my fountain pen. I leaned over the glass table, ignoring the shocked whispers of the onlookers, and flipped straight to the last page of the divorce settlement. I did not even bother reading the specific terms. I already knew he was trying to stick me with the massive mortgage of the house they had just kicked my daughter out of while claiming all the liquid assets for himself. It did not matter. The money in those joint accounts was nothing compared to the damning evidence sitting in my secure server. I signed my name with a smooth, practiced flourish. The pen glided across the paper, sealing the permanent end of a 10-year lie. I capped the pen, stood back up to my full height, and picked up the heavy set of keys to the luxury SUV. I held the keys up, letting the silver metal catch the bright light of the crystal chandeliers. David reached out eagerly, his dark eyes gleaming with greedy triumph. I tossed them lightly into his waiting outstretched hand. "Take it," I said, my voice eerily calm and perfectly projected, so every word landed like a physical strike against his ego. "Keep the car, David. Keep the empty joint accounts. But do me a favor. Tell your financial genius brother-in-law to be careful where he drives that particular vehicle. That car is registered under my name, and its GPS navigation system is directly linked to my firm's internal federal audit system." David's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He gripped the keys tightly, his knuckles turning white, but his blind arrogance quickly overrode his brief flash of doubt. He scoffed a loud, ugly sound that echoed through the lobby space. "You are pathetic, Maya," David sneered, shaking his head. "You really think bluffing is going to save your bruised ego right now? You do not work for anyone important. You are a complete nobody." He turned his back to me and gestured aggressively toward the front desk. "Excuse me," David shouted, waving his hand to summon the nearest hotel employee. "I need a manager over here immediately. This crazy woman is harassing us and creating a public disturbance. She cannot even afford to buy a coffee in this place, let alone rent a suite. I want her escorted off the premises right now." The head concierge, a tall, impeccably dressed man who had been quietly observing the entire interaction from his station, stepped forward. He bypassed David completely. He did not even acknowledge my mother's demanding, entitled glare. Instead, the concierge stopped directly in front of me, placed his hands formally at his sides, and bowed deeply. The concierge, a man named Henri, who had known me for years, glided past David's frantic gesturing as if my husband were nothing more than an annoying gnat. He stopped directly in front of me, placed his hands behind his back, and bowed deeply. "Ma'am," Henri said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet lobby. "The board of directors was informed of your arrival. They have authorized an immediate complimentary upgrade to the presidential suite for the duration of your stay. Shall I have security escort these non-guests off the premises?" David's mouth hung open. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. He blinked rapidly, looking from Henri to me, then back to Henri. "What are you talking about?" David stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "She is a low-level desk clerk for the government. She does not have VIP status here. There has to be some kind of mistake." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I was inches from his face. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The quiet authority in my tone was enough. "There is no mistake, David," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I do not just push papers. I audit the multinational conglomerates that own luxury properties like this one. I find the money they try to hide, and I make sure they stay compliant. They like me because I keep them out of federal prison. You, on the other hand, are standing in a private establishment making a scene, which means you are trespassing." My mother, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally found her voice. "This is absurd," Patricia sputtered, clutching her Birkin bag like a shield. "Maya, you are embarrassing us in front of all these people. Call off these security guards right now and hand over the car keys. We are your family." Family. I repeated the word, tasting bitter on my tongue. Family does not lock a 13-year-old girl out in a freezing rainstorm. Family does not orchestrate a hostile takeover of a house they do not own. You made your choice, Mother. Now you get to live with the consequences. Henri, I said, turning to the concierge. "Please remove them. They are no longer welcome here." Henri signaled with a sharp nod. Two massive security guards materialized from the shadows near the entrance. They moved with practiced efficiency, flanking David and my mother. "Sir, ma'am, it is time to leave," one of the guards said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. David tried to protest, opening his mouth to argue, but the guard simply placed a heavy hand on his shoulder and guided him forcefully toward the revolving glass doors. My mother let out an undignified squawk as the second guard ushered her out, her expensive heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. They were literally thrown out onto the rainy Seattle street, publicly humiliated in front of dozens of onlookers. I watched them go, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction replace the exhaustion in my bones. I turned back to Henri, offering a genuine smile. Thank you, Henri. I appreciate the swift assistance. Henri bowed again. It is always a pleasure, Miss Maya. Your luggage has already been sent up to the presidential suite. Please let us know if you or your daughter require anything else. I took the private elevator up to the penthouse level. When the brass doors slid open, I stepped into a suite that was larger than my entire first apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the Seattle skyline, the rain blurring the city lights into a beautiful, chaotic painting. I found Chloe sitting on the edge of the massive king-sized bed wrapped in a plush white hotel robe. She was drinking hot chocolate. The shivering finally subsided. Are you okay, sweetheart? I asked, sitting beside her and pulling her into a tight hug. She buried her face in my shoulder, nodding slowly. I am sorry, Mom, she whispered. Grandma said I was ruining their Christmas. You did absolutely nothing wrong, Chloe, I said, fiercely, pulling back to look her directly in the eyes. They are the ones who are wrong. And I promise you we are going to have the best Christmas ever. Just the two of us. No yelling, no demands, and no toxic family members allowed. She managed a small, hesitant smile, and that alone was worth every ounce of the fight ahead. I ordered an obscene amount of room service, everything from truffle fries to Wagyu sliders, and we spent the next 2 hours eating in bed and watching terrible holiday movies. Once Chloe finally fell asleep, her breathing deep and even, I quietly slipped out of the bed and walked into the suite's private office. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I sat down at the mahogany desk and pulled my encrypted federal laptop from my bag. I powered it on, bypassing 3 separate layers of biometric security. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room. I did not work in the standard auditing department. I was the lead investigator for the Financial Crimes Division, specializing in international money laundering and corporate fraud. I opened a highly classified file marked Project Icarus. This was the real reason I had been working 80-hour weeks. This was the real reason I was rarely home. I had not been ignoring my family. I had been investigating them. For the past 8 months, I had been quietly tracking a massive web of offshore bank accounts. Accounts that belonged to my supposedly genius brother-in-law, Marcus, and my arrogant husband, David. They thought they were clever, funneling illicit funds through dummy corporations in the Cayman Islands. They thought a low-level number cruncher like me would never notice the discrepancies. They were dead wrong. I watched the screen as the complex web of transactions loaded, tracing millions of dollars in stolen investor funds directly back to Marcus's hedge fund and David's failing brokerage firm. They had used that stolen money to buy Victoria's 70-foot yacht. They had used it to fund my parents' extravagant lifestyle. They had built their entire empire on a foundation of fraud, and I held the detonator. I reached for my encrypted cell phone and dialed a secure direct line to my division chief in Washington. It rang exactly twice before a gruff voice answered. Maya, it is 3 in the morning here. This better be good, Agent Reynolds growled. I stared at the glowing offshore account numbers on my screen, a cold, ruthless energy coursing through my veins. It is more than good, Reynolds, I said softly. It is time. Freeze the Cayman accounts, all of them. Execute the warrants for Marcus and David. The line went dead as Agent Reynolds moved to execute the orders. I did not move from the mahogany desk. My fingers flew across the keyboard, diving straight back into the encrypted master ledgers. The screen reflected in my eyes an endless scrolling matrix of shell companies, offshore trusts, hidden routing numbers, and falsified wire transfers. Marcus thought he was untouchable. He walked around Seattle like a kingmaker, but on paper he was nothing more than a sloppy thief. He had spent the last 3 years quietly bleeding out the retirement funds of municipal workers. Teachers, firefighters, and sanitation workers were losing their life savings so Marcus could buy luxury yachts, and my mother could remodel the east wing of the house I bought. The sheer scale of the embezzlement was staggering, but what disgusted me most was David. My husband, the man who called me a disposable wallet, was the spineless launderer of the operation. He funneled the stolen pension money through his failing brokerage firm, creating fake market losses, to wash the cash clean before routing it to the Cayman Islands. They were sloppy. They left a massive digital trail of breadcrumbs because they never respected the people they stole from, and they certainly never respected the woman sleeping under their own roof. They thought my job was boring. They thought forensic accounting meant tracking petty cash. They had absolutely no idea that I spent my days dismantling international crime syndicates. My secure phone vibrated violently against the desk. It was Director Vance from the Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington. He did not bother with pleasantries when the line connected. Maya Vance said, his voice tight with adrenaline. "We have eyes on the Cayman transfers. If these ledgers match the raw data you sent last night, we are looking at a billion-dollar fraud network. This is not just a bust. This is going to be historic." I typed a rapid command, decrypting the final batch of routing numbers and linking them directly to David's personal servers. "I am sending the unredacted files now, Vance. Look at the routing matrix for the shell company Atlas Holdings. That is David's digital signature. He personally authorized the transfer of $40 million from the Ohio Teachers Pension Fund straight into Marcus's private offshore account. The timestamp is from yesterday afternoon." The silence on the other end was heavy as Vance reviewed the incoming data. "We have them." Vance breathed, the satisfaction evident in his tone. "The tactical teams are assembling now. We are bringing in the FBI to assist. We hit Marcus's firm and David's office at dawn tomorrow. They will not even have time to shred a single document." I closed the primary file, a cold wave of anticipation rushing over me. "Make sure the agents wear their best suits," I replied smoothly. "My family cares deeply about appearances. Let us give them a spectacular show." I disconnected the call and leaned back in the heavy leather chair, rubbing my temples. Just as I closed my eyes, a notification popped up on my personal phone. It was an alert from social media. Victoria had just posted a new live video to her 50,000 followers. I clicked the notification, my expression hardening as her face filled the screen. My sister was standing in the grand marble foyer of my house, the house I paid the mortgage on, wearing a custom silk gown. Around her neck rested a massive glittering diamond necklace that easily cost $500,000. She twirled for the camera, her laugh high, grating and utterly fake. "Early Christmas present from my brilliant husband," Victoria purred to her audience, running her manicured fingers over the heavy diamonds. "This is what happens when you marry a true visionary. I feel so incredibly sorry for people who waste their lives working boring 9-to-5 jobs while we build empires. Cheers to the good life, everyone." I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching so hard my teeth ached. The timestamp on the receipt for that exact necklace was sitting in my evidence folder. Marcus had purchased those diamonds on Tuesday afternoon using the liquidated retirement account of a retired paramedic. Victoria was literally wearing stolen working-class pensions around her neck while publicly mocking the very people her husband robbed to buy them. Her absolute lack of self-awareness was breathtaking, but it only fueled my resolve. She had no idea the empire she was bragging about was about to be reduced to federal ashes. There was a soft, polite knock at the suite door. I locked the laptop screen, tucked my phone into my pocket, and walked out to the living area. I opened the door to find Henri, the concierge, standing there holding a silver tray. "A courier just dropped this off for you, ma'am," Henri said, handing me a thick cream-colored envelope. He specified it was extremely urgent. I thanked him, closed the door, and flipped the envelope over. The paper was heavy, expensive, and embossed with familiar gold foil. It was the official invitation to my parents' annual Christmas Eve gala, the premier social event of their season. The very event David and my mother had explicitly banned me from attending just a few hours earlier in the family group chat. I broke the wax seal and pulled out the ornate card. The timing was entirely deliberate. My mother had sent this via private courier directly to my hotel suite just to rub my nose in my exclusion. It was a final, petty twist of the knife to ensure I knew exactly what I was missing. A calculated move to make me feel small and isolated while they celebrated their stolen wealth in my home. I traced the gold lettering with my thumb. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face, an icy calm settling deep in my chest. They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted a grand spectacle. I tossed the heavy invitation onto the marble kitchen counter. I was going to give them a finale they would never forget. The 48 hours leading up to the gala were a blur of tactical preparation. While Agent Reynolds and his team quietly positioned themselves around Marcus's firm and David's office for the dawn raids, I prepared for a completely different kind of strike. For years I had attended these family functions, blending into the background wearing muted colors, keeping my head down and letting my sister Victoria command the spotlight. My parents expected the mousy, exhausted accountant who funded their lives while asking for nothing in return. Tonight, they were going to meet the lead federal investigator who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. I hired a personal stylist who usually worked with diplomats and high-profile executives. When I stepped out of the black town car at the gates of my parents' sprawling estate on Christmas Eve, I was unrecognizable from the woman who had stood freezing in the airport terminal just days prior. I wore a custom emerald green silk gown that draped flawlessly, exuding a sharp, unyielding authority. A classic red lip and a sleek structural updo completed the transformation. I did not just look wealthy. I looked untouchable. The valet hesitated for a fraction of a second as I handed him my coat, his eyes widening slightly before he bowed and welcomed me inside. The estate was ablaze with lights dripping in opulent holiday decor that I now knew was funded entirely by the stolen retirement accounts of hard-working municipal employees. The grand ballroom was packed with Seattle's elite. Crystal clinked a string quartet played softly in the corner, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and imported champagne. I stepped through the arched double doors and paused at the top of the grand staircase. The effect was immediate. Conversations in my immediate vicinity faltered. Heads turned. I held my head high, channeling every ounce of righteous fury into my posture and began my descent. I owned the stairs. I owned the room. I had barely reached the polished marble floor when a sharp, manicured hand grabbed my elbow, attempting to violently yank me into the shadowy alcove beneath the staircase. It was my mother. Patricia's face was flushed, her perfectly pulled-back hair trembling slightly as she glared at me with absolute fury. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed, her voice a toxic whisper designed to evade the ears of nearby guests. "I explicitly told you not to show your face here tonight. You are embarrassing Victoria. This is her celebration. She and Marcus are the guests of honor, and you parading in here like some desperate attention seeker is pathetic. Leave immediately before I have security throw you out again." I looked down at her hand gripping my bare arm. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers until she felt the sheer freezing weight of my gaze and slowly released her grip. "I am perfectly fine right where I am." "Mother," I said, my voice smooth and deliberately loud enough for the passing waitstaff to hear. "In fact, I have some very important colleagues to catch up with this evening." Before Patricia could launch into another venomous tirade, I turned my back on her and glided straight into the heart of the ballroom. I knew exactly who was on the guest list tonight. My parents always invited the city's power players to validate their stolen status. I scanned the room and locked eyes with a familiar face standing near the grand fireplace. It was Judge Robert Harrison, a federal judge, who had signed off on dozens of my division's warrants, standing beside Mayor Thomas Sterling. My mother scurried behind me, frantically trying to intercept my path. "Maya, stop this instant," Patricia whispered furiously, grabbing at the fabric of my gown. "Do not you dare approach the mayor. You are going to make a fool of yourself and ruin this family's reputation. They do not want to speak to a glorified bookkeeper." I ignored her completely and stepped directly into the circle of powerful men. "Judge Harrison, Mayor Sterling," I said warmly, extending my hand. "It is a pleasure to see you both outside of a federal briefing room." Judge Harrison's stern face instantly broke into a massive, genuine smile. He clasped my hand enthusiastically. "Maya, good God, it is wonderful to see you. I had no idea you were attending tonight. The task force in Washington has been singing your praises all week. Your latest forensic analysis on the Atlas Holdings case was nothing short of brilliant." Mayor Sterling nodded in eager agreement, shaking my hand next. "Absolutely incredible work, Maya. The city owes you a massive debt of gratitude. When the director told me you were personally leading the financial crimes division here, I knew our municipal funds were finally in safe hands. We need to schedule a formal lunch next week. The city council wants to consult you on the new compliance initiatives. I smiled graciously, exchanging a few more industry specifics with the two most powerful men in the room. They hung on my every word, treating me with a level of profound professional respect that money simply could not buy. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched my mother. Patricia was standing paralyzed a few feet away. Her jaw had literally dropped. The cocktail napkin she was holding fluttered to the floor. Her mind was visibly short-circuiting as she tried to comprehend the scene unfolding in front of her. The daughter she had dismissed as a disposable wallet, the woman she had ordered out of the Ritz-Carlton lobby, was holding court with the city's elite, and they were treating her like royalty. She could not fathom how her low-level number cruncher commanded such intense reverence. I excused myself from the judge and the mayor with a polite nod and turned back toward the center of the room. The absolute bewilderment on my mother's face was deeply satisfying, but the night was far from over. Across the ballroom, standing near the towering, heavily decorated Christmas tree, Victoria had finally noticed the shift in the room's attention. She saw the mayor laughing at my joke. She saw the judge patting my shoulder with utmost respect. And most importantly, she saw that the spotlight she so desperately craved had completely shifted off her and onto me. Victoria's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure jealousy. She gripped her crystal flute of champagne so tightly, the stem looked ready to snap. She shoved her way past a group of wealthy investors, the stolen diamond necklace glittering aggressively against her chest. Her eyes were locked dead on me, blazing with irrational fury. She marched across the marble floor, her drink in hand, preparing to do what she always did when she felt threatened. She was coming to publicly humiliate me. Victoria closed the final few feet between us, her heavy diamond necklace catching the chandelier light with every aggressive step. She came to an abrupt halt, intentionally splashing a few drops of her champagne onto the polished marble floor to emphasize her arrival. Her eyes raked over my custom emerald gown, her upper lip curling into a practiced sneer. She had always excelled at playing the mean girl, relying on an audience to amplify her cruelty. Tonight, she had the entire ballroom watching, waiting for the outcast sister to be put in her place. "Maya, I see you decided to crash my celebration after all," Victoria announced, projecting her voice so it carried clearly over the gentle hum of the string quartet. The surrounding guests naturally gravitated toward the drama, forming a loose, curious circle around us. Victoria gestured vaguely at my dress with her free hand, a mocking laugh escaping her throat. "Tell me, where does one even find a cheap rental like that on Christmas Eve? Did David finally cut off your allowance? Is that why you are crashing my party to beg for free food?" The silence that rippled through the immediate crowd was thick and uncomfortable. A few of Victoria's sycophantic friends offered polite, subdued titters of amusement. My mother, standing safely out of the direct line of fire, watched with eager anticipation, waiting for me to shatter and flee. They still viewed me as the quiet, obedient shadow who paid their bills and absorbed their insults to keep the peace. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I stood completely still, letting the sheer weight of her childish insult hang in the air until her confident smirk began to waver. "Beg," I repeated, my tone remarkably pleasant, but laced with a lethal calm. "Like how you begged me to forge your college transcripts so you would not get expelled, Victoria." The polite titters instantly vanished. The silence in our section of the ballroom became absolute deafening. Even the string quartet seemed to play a little softer. Victoria's jaw clamped shut, the color draining from her perfectly contoured cheeks. I kept my voice conversational, ensuring the surrounding elite, including Mayor Sterling, heard every single syllable. "You were failing your entire business curriculum during your sophomore year. You showed up at my dorm room, crying, terrified that Daddy would cut off your credit cards when the university kicked you out. You begged me to hack into the registrar system and alter your grades. I declined the hacking, but I did spend 3 straight weeks rewriting your final exams and forging your academic submissions just to keep you afloat. I find it endlessly fascinating that you now boast about building empires when you could not even pass basic macroeconomics without my intervention." Whispers erupted through the crowd. I could see the mayor exchange a sharp raised eyebrow glance with Judge Harrison. Victoria's carefully curated image of a brilliant self-made power couple was taking a direct public hit. Panic flashed in her eyes. She needed to regain the high ground immediately, to dismiss me as a jealous, bitter sibling before her reputation sustained permanent damage. She let out a high, artificial laugh, waving her hand as if batting away a fly. "My sister has always had a wonderfully toxic imagination," Victoria announced to the onlookers, her voice shrill and desperate. "She is just acting out because her marriage is falling apart. We are actually here tonight to celebrate things that truly matter. As you all know, Marcus and I are officially launching the Victoria Hope Foundation this evening. We are giving back to the community, helping underprivileged families secure a future. That is what real success looks like, Maya. Philanthropy, generosity, building a legacy." She looked around the room, seeking validation from the wealthy donors she had spent the evening schmoozing. A few guests nodded approvingly, their tension easing as the conversation shifted to a socially acceptable topic like charity. I tilted my head, studying her with clinical precision. "You brought up the Victoria Hope Foundation," I said, my voice cutting through the renewed chatter like a scalpel. "That is an incredibly bold move, Victoria, considering you just registered the entity last week under a 501c3 tax exemption." Victoria lifted her chin, recovering a fraction of her arrogance. "Yes, I did. Because unlike you, I care about people. We have already collected over $2 million in pledges tonight alone." I took a slow step forward. The air around us felt electrically charged. "Let us talk about those pledges," I said, raising my voice just enough to ensure the investors standing behind her could hear. "You registered the charity in Delaware, but the primary routing numbers listed on the donation forms direct the funds straight to a secondary holding account. An account managed by Atlas Holdings, a shell company incorporated in Belize." Victoria froze. Her champagne flute trembled slightly. "A shell company," I continued, my words striking like physical blows, "that currently lists you and Marcus as the sole corporate officers. You are not building a legacy of philanthropy. You are routing 80% of these charitable donations directly into an offshore account to fund your lavish lifestyle, while claiming a massive tax deduction. That is not charity, Victoria. That is a federal felony." The collective gasp from the surrounding crowd was audible. The wealthy socialites and investors, the very people who had just written massive checks to her fraudulent foundation, stared at Victoria in mounting horror. They were not just witnessing a family squabble anymore. They were being informed of their own financial exposure. "Are you insane?" an older gentleman standing near the mayor demanded, glaring at Victoria. "I just pledged $100,000 to that fund." Victoria was hyperventilating, her eyes darting wildly around the room as the trap I set snapped completely shut. She opened her mouth to scream, to deny the accusations, to call for security, but the words died in her throat. Her face turned an ashen, sickly white. Before she could emit a single sound, the crowd parted abruptly. Marcus stepped into the center of the circle. He was a towering, imposing figure, his custom tuxedo barely containing the aggressive, furious energy radiating from him. He moved with a heavy, intimidating grace, placing himself directly between me and his panicked wife, ready to defend his golden empire. Marcus stopped mere inches from my face. His bespoke Tom Ford suit was tailored to project absolute dominance. The midnight blue velvet caught the light as he squared his broad, aggressive shoulders. He smelled of expensive scotch and the distinct metallic scent of desperate adrenaline. He used his height to loom over me, a physical intimidation tactic he had undoubtedly used 1,000 times in corporate boardrooms to force weaker opponents into submission. Men like Marcus operated on a primal frequency. They believed that if they took up enough physical space, the truth would simply yield to their mass. He leaned down, invading my personal space until I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. His firm managed the portfolios of at least half the guests in attendance tonight. He was viewed as a financial oracle in Seattle, a man with the Midas touch who guaranteed impossible returns year after year. He used that golden reputation as a shield. He spoke just loud enough for the inner circle of guests to hear his voice, a low, vibrating growl meant to shatter my composure. "Listen, little girl," Marcus warned, his jaw locked in a rigid line of fury. You play with spreadsheets. I move global markets. Do not speak about things you do not understand. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I did not avert my gaze. I let my absolute silence stretch, holding my ground with an icy, immovable calm that forced him to overcompensate. I knew the exact reality of his global markets. I had spent the last 48 hours tracking his desperate, frantic wire transfers across 3 different continents. I knew his entire hedge fund was a highly leveraged house of cards, teetering on the edge of spectacular collapse. Men like Marcus abhorred a vacuum. They needed fear tears or submission to function. My absolute stillness was causing his carefully constructed facade of dominance to fracture right before my eyes. I could see a faint sheen of sweat forming at his hairline. I noticed the microscopic tremor in his clenched fist. He was not a titan of industry. He was a cornered rat wearing silk lapels. Realizing that physical intimidation was completely failing against me, Marcus rapidly pivoted to his secondary weapon: performative benevolence. He took a half-step back, opening his posture to the surrounding guests, transforming his aggressive snarl into a mask of exaggerated condescending pity. He draped a heavy protective arm around Victoria's bare shoulders, pulling her close to cast himself as the noble, long-suffering defender of the family. "I know you are going through an incredibly difficult time right now," Maya Marcus announced, pitching his voice, so it echoed clearly across the marble floor. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath. "Victoria and I have discussed your tragic situation at length," he continued smoothly, playing directly to his wealthy investors. "We know David's brokerage is failing. There is no shame in hitting rock bottom, Maya. But bursting into a charity gala and throwing wild, unhinged accusations at your own sister is simply unacceptable." He paused, letting his performative disappointment sink into the crowd. Then he delivered the killing blow, a line designed to strip me of any remaining dignity in front of the city's elite. "If David left you broke, I can get you a data entry gig at my firm," Marcus offered loudly, his tone dripping with manufactured charity. "Minimum wage, but it will keep you and your kid off the streets. We take care of our own even when they have lost their minds." The tension in the room instantly shifted. Victoria's panicked, ragged breathing leveled out, replaced by a triumphant, vicious smirk. She leaned into her husband's embrace, playing the part of the magnanimous victim perfectly. My mother, Patricia, who had been hovering frantically near the edge of the circle, let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief. She followed it with a sharp, mocking chuckle that cut through the quiet ballroom. A ripple of polite, elite laughter moved through their sycophantic friends and wealthy investors. They were eager to accept this narrative. It was comfortable. It was familiar. The outcast sister, driven mad by poverty and jealousy, lashing out at her benevolent, wildly successful brother-in-law. The crisis was averted. The natural social order was restored. I was just the crazy, destitute relative looking for a handout. Patricia leaned over to the wife of a real estate developer, whispering loudly about my unfortunate mental breakdown and how bravely Victoria was handling the stress. I let the derisive laughter wash over me. It felt brittle and entirely hollow. I observed the intricate details of his performance. The way he adjusted his cuffs to draw attention to his platinum Patek Philippe watch. The way his chest puffed out with unearned pride. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime, completely unaware that the theater was already burning to the ground around him. Mayor Sterling and Judge Harrison were watching the exchange with intense, unblinking focus. Their earlier reverence for me was now warring with the brutal familial humiliation playing out. They knew my professional standing, but this was a personal bloodbath. They were waiting to see how the lead federal investigator would handle a public execution. I raised my hand, signaling a passing waiter, and smoothly lifted a fresh crystal flute of champagne from his silver tray. My movements were slow, fluid, and utterly devoid of panic. The crystal flute felt cool against my fingers. I took my time. I let them wait. I let the silence stretch until it became suffocating. The string quartet had completely stopped playing. The only sound in the grand ballroom was the crackle of the massive fireplace and the nervous shifting of expensive leather shoes. I brought the glass to my lips, maintaining unbreakable, dead-eyed contact with Marcus. The bubbles danced against the crystal. The entire room waited for me to break, to scream, to dissolve into tears and run out the grand double doors. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate sip. The vintage was excellent. I lowered the glass, letting a razor-thin, terrifying smile curve my lips. The polite laughter in the room began to die off, suffocated by the sheer freezing confidence radiating from my posture. Data entry. I repeated, my voice dropping to a deadly conversational calm that somehow carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. I do not think your firm is going to be hiring anyone, Marcus. Especially since your Q3 liquidity is entirely fabricated. The word hung in the silent air of the grand ballroom, sharp and lethal. Marcus froze. The condescending manufactured pity instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a rigid, entirely unscripted shock. For a fraction of a second, the arrogant king of Seattle finance looked exactly like a man who had just felt the ground give way beneath his custom Italian leather shoes. He recovered quickly, or at least he tried to. He let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed too harshly against the marble pillars, desperate to regain control of the narrative. Fabricated, Marcus repeated, shaking his head as if dealing with a confused, unruly child. Maya, please, you have clearly had too much champagne tonight. You are upset about David leaving you and you are lashing out. I understand, but let the adults handle the real business before you say something that gets you sued for defamation. I did not back down. I set my empty crystal flute onto the tray of a passing terrified waiter and took a slow, deliberate step toward him. Let us talk about real business then, Marcus, I said, my voice carrying a crisp, undeniable authority that sliced through his bluster. Let us talk about account number ending in 4409 at the Grand Cayman Registry under the name Atlas Holdings. You moved $40 million on Tuesday afternoon. You routed it through 3 different proxy servers to disguise the origin, but the money originated from the Municipal Workers' Retirement Fund. Marcus stopped laughing. The color began to drain from his face, leaving a sickly pale undertone beneath his expensive tan. You reported a 22% yield to your investors in the third quarter. I continued, pacing my words so they resonated clearly across the room. But those returns were not generated by your brilliant market strategies. There were no emerging green tech investments. There were no lucrative real estate acquisitions in developing markets. You generated those returns by liquidating the pension funds of firefighters, teachers, and sanitation workers. You used their life savings to pay dividends to your early investors, to create the illusion of massive profitability, while siphoning millions off the top to fund Victoria's new diamonds and your luxury yachts. That is not a complex derivative structure, Marcus. That is a textbook Ponzi scheme. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. The wealthy guests, the socialites, the powerful politicians, they were no longer looking at me with amusement or disdain. They were staring at Marcus. Many of the people standing in this very room were his investors. They were the ones holding the fabricated quarterly reports I had just exposed. A prominent real estate developer standing near the mayor took a hesitant step forward. Marcus, the man demanded, his voice thick with sudden dread. What is she talking about? I just wired your firm $5 million last week for the new international tech fund. Tell me she is lying. Marcus was sweating now. A bead of moisture rolled down his temple. His broad shoulders hitched as he desperately tried to maintain his facade of untouchable superiority. He shot a frantic, venomous glare at me before turning back to his panicked investors. This is exactly why we do not discuss corporate finances at holiday parties, Marcus announced to the room, forcing a condescending smirk that trembled at the edges. My sister-in-law means well, Arthur, I assure you. But she is a simple bookkeeper. Women like her see standard offshore tax mitigation routing, and they panic because they simply do not understand the mechanics of high finance. They see complex global market movements and assume the worst. It is adorable, really, but completely inaccurate. Your money is perfectly safe. The excuse was weak, steeped in arrogant misogyny, and judging by the horrified expressions surrounding him, absolutely no one was buying it. The wealthy elite did not become wealthy by ignoring red flags, and I had just set the entire ballroom on fire. I stepped close to Marcus. I stepped directly into his personal space, invading the physical zone he used to intimidate weaker opponents. I looked up into his panicked, furious eyes, letting him see the absolute certainty in mine. He was completely outmatched, and we both knew it. Tax mitigation, I said softly, ensuring my voice carried only to him and the immediate circle of investors. You needed the $2 million pledged to Victoria's fake charity tonight just to cover the margin calls you are facing on Monday morning. Your entire firm is insolvent. You are drowning, Marcus. And you made a fatal mistake. He stared at me, his chest heaving, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Who are you? He whispered, the arrogance finally stripping away to reveal the terrified criminal underneath. I leaned in closer. You shouldn't have used David to wash the money. Marcus flinched as if I had physically struck him. He's sloppy! I continued my words, hitting him like rhythmic hammer strikes. He left a digital footprint the size of Texas. You needed a launderer, so you used my spineless husband and his failing brokerage firm to clean the stolen pension cash. You had him take fake losses on phantom trades to wash the money before routing it offshore. But David is an amateur. He thought deleting an email was enough to hide a federal crime. He used his personal server. He did not even bother to use a VPN for the final transfer to the Caymans. I mapped your entire criminal network in less than 48 hours. Victoria let out a strangled, breathless gasp. She looked at her husband, searching for reassurance, looking for the arrogant king who always protected her from the consequences of their actions. But Marcus had nothing left. He was completely trapped. The murmurs in the crowd were rapidly escalating into an angry, chaotic roar. Billionaires were pulling out their phones, frantically dialing their personal attorneys and wealth managers. The elegant Christmas Eve gala had transformed into a crime scene in a matter of minutes. The illusion of the golden family was shattered beyond repair. Suddenly, the sharp, piercing sound of metal striking crystal rang out over the rising panic. Everyone turned toward the grand staircase. Richard, my father, stood on the landing, his face an unreadable mask of desperate authority. He held a crystal champagne flute in one hand and a silver fork in the other. He struck the glass again, commanding the attention of the frantic room, preparing to make an urgent grand announcement to stop the bleeding and save his precious reputation. The ringing of crystal cut through the suffocating tension like a blade. All eyes snapped toward the grand staircase. My father, Richard, descended the first few carpeted steps with the measured, heavy tread of a man who believed he owned the very ground he walked on. He handed his champagne flute to a bewildered waiter and moved directly to the small stage where the string quartet had abandoned their instruments. He seized the microphone from its silver stand. The feedback whined sharply for a split second before he adjusted his grip, projecting an aura of supreme, unshakable confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and dear friends, Richard boomed, his deep baritone rolling across the marble ballroom. I apologize for the disruption. The holidays are a time of high emotion, and occasionally the pressures of our respective industries bleed into our personal lives. We have all endured a grueling financial quarter, and it seems the stress has sparked some wild, completely unfounded rumors here tonight. He paused, offering the crowd a warm, paternal smile. It was a masterful performance. He was actively attempting to rewrite the reality of the room, framing my federal fraud accusations as the hysterical ramblings of an exhausted, unstable woman. I watched him work the crowd, disgusted by his practiced ease. He looked directly at Arthur, the panicking billionaire real estate developer, and offered a reassuring nod. We are not a family that hides from challenges. Richard continued, his voice swelling with manufactured pride. We face them head on. We protect our own, and we protect the people who have placed their unwavering trust in our ventures. Marcus has built an unprecedented financial portfolio, and our family stands behind his firm with absolute concrete certainty. Richard gripped the microphone tighter, leaning into the crowd. He needed a spectacle. He needed a distraction massive enough to blind the wealthy investors to the gaping black hole in Marcus's ledgers. Therefore, Richard announced, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Tonight we celebrate more than just the holiday. We celebrate a monumental step forward for our family legacy. I am thrilled to announce that just hours ago, we officially agreed to sell this very family estate to Vanguard Holdings for $10 million. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom, rapidly followed by a wave of frantic, relieved whispering. This transaction will be finalized immediately after the holiday weekend, Richard declared, driving the final nail of his deception into the minds of the investors. Every single cent of that $10 million sale is being used to inject pure liquidity directly into Marcus's fund. We are doubling down on our investments. The capital is secured. Your portfolios are secure. We are entering the new year stronger and more unified than ever before. Let us raise a glass to the future. The effect was instantaneous and deeply sickening. The wealthy guests, desperate to believe their millions were safe, eagerly swallowed the lie. The tension that had been choking the room evaporated, replaced by a sudden raucous cheer. Glasses were raised high into the air. The billionaires who had been moments away from calling their lawyers were now clapping Richard on the back and cheering for Marcus. I stood motionless in the center of the room, watching the grand illusion take hold. Patricia practically wept with relief. She clasped her hands to her chest, her diamond rings glittering as she beamed up at her husband, like he was a conquering hero. The sheer suffocating terror of losing her social standing vanished, replaced immediately by her signature brand of haughty arrogance. She turned to her friends, loudly proclaiming how brilliant Richard was, and how thrilling the new business venture would be. Victoria released a massive, shuddering breath. The panic that had stripped her of her color completely dissipated. She threw her arms around Marcus's neck, kissing his cheek in a blatant, theatrical display of solidarity. She turned back toward me, her eyes flashing with a renewed, vicious superiority. She truly believed that $10 million had just bought their innocence. She thought money had just magically erased the federal crimes staring them in the face. Then David stepped out from the periphery of the crowd. My husband, the man who had funneled stolen municipal pensions through his failing brokerage, moved to stand beside Victoria and Marcus. He looked incredibly smug, adjusting the lapels of his suit as he joined the protective circle of my corrupt family. He refused to look me in the eye when I first arrived, but now, bolstered by Richard's massive financial pledge, he found his courage. He offered me a small, condescending smirk, a silent communication that I had lost. They all looked at me with varying degrees of mockery and triumph. They believed this phony real estate deal proved their ultimate victory over my pathetic attempt to bring them down. They thought they had outsmarted the mousy accountant. I watched them bask in their delusion. They were celebrating a lifeline that did not exist. They were cheering for a $10 million injection of pure liquidity that was nothing more than dust. Their arrogance was so profound, so entirely blinding, that they never once stopped to consider who might actually be holding the strings to Vanguard Holdings. The applause from the investors finally began to die down as guests turned back to their conversations, eager to resume the holiday festivities now that their wallets felt secure. The string quartet tentatively picked up their bows, ready to resume playing. I did not look defeated. I did not retreat. I lifted my hands, raising them high enough for the entire family circle to see. I brought my palms together. A single sharp clap echoed like a gunshot through the ballroom. I brought them together again. The slow, rhythmic sound sliced right through the lingering cheers. The string quartet froze. The conversations immediately ceased. The crowd parted once more as I began to walk slowly and deliberately toward the stage. I kept my eyes locked dead on my father, continuing that slow, mocking applause with every step I took, completely silencing the room before I reached for the microphone. My father stared at me as I stepped onto the low stage. His hand gripped the microphone stand with white-knuckled intensity, his confident mask slipping to reveal genuine, unadulterated confusion. He was entirely accustomed to me shrinking into the background, absorbing his dismissive commands and bending to his will. The woman standing before him, now bathed in the chandelier light with absolute terrifying calm, was a stranger to him. I did not ask for permission. I reached out and wrapped my hand over the microphone, pulling it from his rigid grasp. He surrendered it without a single fight, too stunned by my sheer audacity to physically resist. I turned to face the sea of wealthy investors, corrupt socialites, and my panicking family members. The silence in the ballroom was so profound, I could hear the faint hum of the audio equipment. I looked directly at Marcus, who was visibly trembling near the fireplace, and then let my gaze sweep over my father. "There is a slight misunderstanding," Richard Weiss announced, my voice echoing with crisp, lethal clarity across the grand space. "Vanguard Holdings did not send you an offer to purchase." My father blinked, his brow furrowing in a mix of irritation and mounting dread. "What are you talking about?" "Maya," he hissed, leaning close to my ear, his voice a desperate, harsh whisper. "Step down from this stage immediately. You are making a fool of yourself. I literally have the Vanguard term sheet in my office." I ignored his pathetic command. I unclasped the custom emerald clutch resting in my left hand. I reached inside and retrieved a thick, heavily folded stack of legal papers. The bright red notary seals and thick black ink caught the light as I held the stack up for the entire room to see. "This is not an acquisition offer," I stated, ensuring every single guest heard the finality in my tone. "This is a notice of foreclosure, and it is not from some random faceless conglomerate. I am the sole owner of Vanguard Holdings." The collective gasp that ripped through the ballroom sounded like all the oxygen being sucked out of the room at once. The investors stared in absolute paralyzing shock. The mayor dropped his champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor with a sharp crash, but no one even flinched. They were entirely captivated by the utter destruction of Richard's golden empire. My father physically recoiled. He stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting the edge of a mahogany side table. He looked at the document in my hand, then up at my face, his eyes wide with a terror he had never experienced in his entire privileged life. "That is impossible," Richard stammered, his booming baritone reduced to a weak, breathy rasp. "You do not have that kind of capital. You are a bookkeeper. You do not own a private equity firm." I turned fully toward him, letting the microphone capture every syllable of my response. "5 years ago, Richard, you and Marcus made a series of catastrophic, highly illegal leveraged bets on commercial real estate. You lost everything. This pristine family estate, your precious cars, Victoria's trust fund, it was all gone. You were completely bankrupt. The bank was 72 hours away from putting padlocks on these grand front doors and throwing you out onto the street." The wealthy elite watching the spectacle began muttering fiercely among themselves. They were learning that the titans of finance they blindly trusted were nothing more than glorified con artists who had been broke for half a decade. "You came to my small apartment begging for help," I continued, my voice a relentless driving force. "You cried in my living room. You swore you would change your ways. You begged me to use my industry connections to find a private buyer who would let you quietly lease the estate back so you could maintain your social standing. I did not just find a buyer. I used the seed money from my own software patents to create Vanguard Holdings. I bought your massive toxic debt. I paid off the bank entirely. I have owned this entire estate, every brick, every chandelier, every blade of grass for the last 5 years." Marcus grabbed the edge of the fireplace mantel to keep from collapsing. Victoria covered her mouth with both hands, tears of pure horror finally spilling over her expertly contoured cheeks. "I allowed you to live here, rent-free," I said, projecting my voice to the furthest corners of the room. "I funded your extravagant lifestyle because despite your endless cruelty, I still believed in the concept of family. I believed you deserved a roof over your heads. But you mistook my generosity for weakness. You mistook my silence for stupidity." I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, locking eyes with my mother Patricia, who was standing frozen near the ice sculpture. Last week I continued the raw, unfiltered fury, finally bleeding into my perfectly composed tone. My 13-year-old daughter was walking home from school in a torrential downpour. She lost her house keys. She was freezing, soaked to the bone and terrified. She came to this house, the house I legally owned, seeking shelter. And you, Patricia, looked at your own granddaughter shivering on the porch, told her she was tracking mud onto your expensive imported rugs, and locked the heavy oak door directly in her face. You left a child in the freezing rain to protect a rug that I paid for. The silence that followed was heavy with absolute collective revulsion. The high society guests, despite their own flaws, looked at Patricia with open, undisguised disgust. Leaving a child in the rain crossed a line that even the ruthless elite could not stomach. "You do not own this estate, Richard," I declared, raising the foreclosure notice high into the air. "There is no $10 million bailout coming to save Marcus from his federal crimes. There is only this foreclosure notice executed effective immediately due to your breach of the lease agreement. I am repossessing the property. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your designer bags and vacate my premises." The reality of the situation hit the family like a freight train. The illusion of their superiority, their wealth, their absolute control vanished into thin air. They were broke, facing federal prison, and about to be completely homeless. A piercing, unhinged shriek shattered the silence. Patricia violently shoved her way through the circle of horrified guests. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, primal rage. The elegant socialite facade was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at my face, her voice cracking, as she screamed at the top of her lungs. "You are a liar!" Patricia shrieked, her chest heaving as she stormed toward the stage. "She is lying. Do not listen to a single word this ungrateful wretch says. She is a jealous, bitter, lying little rat trying to steal our legacy." I let Patricia's unhinged accusation hang in the heavy, silent air of the ballroom. The brilliant chandelier light illuminated the fine mist of spittle flying from her lips. Her perfectly coiffed hair was beginning to unravel, stray strands falling across her face as she breathed in ragged, furious gasps. She was a woman who had spent 40 years meticulously cultivating an image of effortless grace and undeniable superiority, and it was evaporating in a matter of seconds. The elite guests surrounding us took collective steps backward, treating my mother like a dangerous, unpredictable animal. "You are not taking this house!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill, unrecognizable pitch. She stomped her expensive heel against the polished marble floor. "I will not allow you to ruin your sister's night. Victoria has worked too hard to build her foundation. She is building an empire. Victoria deserves a beautiful life, and you are just a greedy, bitter spinster trying to drag us down into your miserable little existence." The insult was absurd, considering I was standing right across from my husband, but Patricia was simply grabbing for the most vicious, antiquated weapon she could find to attack my worth. She continued her unhinged tirade, her eyes wide and wild, as she demanded I hand over the deed immediately. "You will transfer this property to Victoria tonight. You owe this family. You owe us for putting up with your mediocrity all these years." She looked frantically at the guests, seeking validation, desperately hoping her wealthy peers would back her up and put me in my place. But the investors and socialites were actively looking away. Mayor Sterling deliberately turned his back on Richard, signaling to the entire room that the Addams family was officially toxic. They despised public humiliation, but they despised poverty even more. I did not raise my voice. True power does not scream. True power stands perfectly still and lets the desperate exhaust themselves. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, just a clinical, terrifying emptiness. "I owe you nothing," I stated, the quiet resonance of my voice cutting through her hysteria with surgical precision. "I paid your massive debts. I protected your precious social standing because I foolishly thought there was a shred of humanity left in you. But last week cured me of that delusion permanently." Patricia opened her mouth to screech another insult, but I took a single deliberate step forward, forcing her to shrink back. "You locked my daughter in the rain for 5 hours, claiming you decided we didn't live here anymore. You were right. Only one of us lives here, and it isn't you." I let those words settle over the crowd. A new wave of furious, disgusted whispering swept through the ballroom. Locking a child out in a freezing downpour was a bridge too far even for Seattle's most ruthless corporate titans. I watched the final remnants of my mother's social capital incinerate. Victoria had been standing absolutely frozen, her mind struggling to process the catastrophic collapse of her carefully curated reality. She looked from the red-stamped foreclosure notice in my hand to her father's ashen, completely defeated face. The truth finally pierced her impenetrable bubble of entitlement. Dad, Victoria whispered, her voice trembling violently. Then it escalated into a deafening, panicked shriek. Dad, tell me she is lying. Tell me you own this house. Richard could not even look his favorite daughter in the eye. He stared at the floor, his broad shoulders slumped in absolute pathetic defeat. Victoria, sweetie, we can explain. It was a temporary liquidity issue. 5 years? Victoria screamed, her manicured hands pulling frantically at her own hair. You have been broke for 5 years. You let me plan a $10 million charity launch based on a phantom real estate deal. You let me stand up here and humiliate myself in front of my investors. We were protecting you, Patricia cried out, rushing forward to grab Victoria's arm. We wanted you to have the life you were meant for. Victoria violently shoved our mother away. The sheer force of the push sent Patricia stumbling backward into a catering cart, sending a massive silver tray of champagne flutes crashing to the floor. The shattering glass underscored the total irreversible fracture of the Golden family. Do not touch me! Victoria spat, her face contorted with a vicious, ugly rage. You lied to me! Both of you. You made me look like a fool in front of Marcus. You made me look like a fool in front of the entire city. My trust fund is gone. My house is gone. You are nothing but pathetic, broke liars. She turned her wrath to seek comfort from her husband, but Marcus was already stepping away from her. He was putting deliberate physical distance between himself and his suddenly impoverished wife. He was calculating his own survival. A broke wife with no family capital combined with federal investigators breathing down his neck was a liability he could no longer afford. The perfect, untouchable power couple was disintegrating in real time. Victoria saw the cold calculation in his eyes and let out a raw, guttural sob of pure despair. The room devolved into a symphony of destruction. My parents were actively turning on each other. Richard was loudly blaming Patricia's excessive spending habits, while Patricia shrieked about Richard's weak business acumen. Victoria was screaming at all of them, demanding they magically fix a situation that was completely beyond repair. The flawless, enviable family unit had completely devoured itself in front of 300 horrified witnesses. They had no money, no home, no reputation, and absolutely no loyalty to one another. I watched them tear each other to pieces, feeling a profound, absolute sense of closure. The terrified 15-year-old girl they had abused, the neglected daughter, they had mocked, the loyal sister they had belittled, she was entirely gone. I was the architect of their ruin, and I had built their cage using nothing but their own greed and arrogance, but the evening was not quite finished. While my parents and sister spiraled into a screaming match of mutual recriminations, a figure detached himself from the chaotic background. David stepped forward. He bypassed the weeping Victoria and my arguing parents, stopping just a few feet away from me. Despite witnessing the complete annihilation of the family's empire and the exposure of his own money laundering, David still possessed that insufferable, arrogant swagger. He looked me up and down and let out a dark, malicious laugh. He shook his head, thoroughly amused, genuinely, believing he still held the ultimate trump card regarding our personal finances. Take the damn house, Maya! David sneered, his voice cutting through the lingering echoes of Patricia and Victoria's shrieking match. He shoved his hands deep into the pockets of his tailored trousers, rocking back on his heels with an insufferably smug grin. Who actually cares about this outdated brick mausoleum anyway? You think you have won because you hold a piece of paper for a property you cannot even afford to maintain. He took a few arrogant steps forward, effectively separating himself from the pathetic wreckage of the Addams family. He wanted the entire ballroom to know that he, David, was the only man smart enough to outwit the situation. He looked around at the silent watching crowd, playing to his audience. For years, I had watched him use this exact same posture to intimidate junior analysts at his firm and charm naive clients out of their savings. Now he was turning that practiced manipulation on me. Let her have the keys, Richard David announced, gesturing dismissively toward my father, who was still staring blankly at the floor. Because she does not have a single red cent left to pay the property taxes, or the utilities, or the staggering legal fees she is going to need when I'm done with her in divorce court. He turned his cold, calculating gaze back to me, his smirk widening into a full display of teeth. You see, ladies and gentlemen, my brilliant, supposedly calculating wife forgot one tiny, crucial detail in her grand master plan. We share our finances. And yesterday afternoon, while she was busy printing out dramatic foreclosure notices and playing real estate mogul, I paid a little visit to our bank. I completely drained our joint accounts. Every single penny, $400,000 securely transferred into an offshore holding company under my name alone. A murmur rippled through the remaining guests. The wealthy elite understood the brutal finality of financial starvation. They watched me closely, expecting my facade to finally crack, expecting the panic to set in as I realized I was holding a worthless asset with zero liquidity to back it up. David stood there practically vibrating with triumph, waiting for my knees to buckle. He believed he had just checkmated me in front of the entire city. Instead, I smiled. It was not a polite smile. It was not a sad, resigned smile. It was a chilling, deeply predatory smile that started at the corners of my mouth and reached all the way to my eyes. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as I let that smile take hold. David's smug grin faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny flicker of uncertainty flashing across his arrogant features. "Oh, David," I purred, my voice dropping to a low, lethal cadence that commanded absolute attention. "Did you honestly believe that a federal forensic accountant would leave her actual hard-earned savings sitting in an unsecured joint account with a man who spends his Tuesday afternoons sleeping with his 24-year-old secretary at the downtown Marriott?" The color drained from David's face so fast he looked physically ill. A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed from the audience. Several society wives exchanged wide-eyed, scandalized glances, whispering furiously behind manicured hands. The mayor actually pulled out a silk handkerchief and dabbed at his sweating forehead, desperate to distance himself from the unfolding soap opera. "You are insane," David stammered, his hands flying out of his pockets as his confident posture completely collapsed. "That is a lie. You are making things up because you are backed into a corner. You are trying to deflect from the fact that you are broke." I ignored his pathetic sputtering and took a slow, measured step toward him, closing the physical distance between us. "You did not drain my savings, David. My actual capital has been secured in an impenetrable single-signature trust since the day I discovered your little extracurricular activities 6 months ago. I watched your movements. I tracked every hotel receipt, every jewelry purchase, every pathetic lie you spun while claiming you were working late. I tilted my head, watching him squirm like a bug pinned to a corkboard. The account you drained yesterday was an incredibly specific, meticulously crafted trap. It was a federally monitored honeypot." David froze. His eyes darted frantically around the room, desperately looking for an exit, looking for someone to tell him this was a bluff. But there was no salvation coming. The silence in the room was absolute, every single person hanging on to my next words. "The $400,000 sitting in that account did not belong to me," I explained, projecting my voice, so every investor and family member could hear the precise mechanics of his demise. Those funds were flagged municipal pension assets. They were intentionally placed there under the direct supervision of the federal authorities investigating Marcus's brokerage firm. We needed to know exactly how the dirty money was moving through the family network. We needed to see who was willing to hide stolen assets when the pressure was applied. We needed a rat to take the cheese. And you, driven by your insatiable, predictable greed, took it without a second thought. The absolute horror washing over David's face was the most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed. His mouth opened and closed silently, his arrogant bravado entirely stripped away, leaving only the terrified core of a common thief. He looked down at his hands as if they were covered in blood. "By authorizing that electronic transfer yesterday, I stated delivering the final fatal blow with zero empathy. You moved federally flagged stolen pension funds across state and international lines. You did not steal my money, David. You stole the federal government's bait. You just committed felony wire fraud, and you left a digital paper trail so wide and so bright it practically glows in the dark." The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The guests, realizing they were standing in the middle of an active, catastrophic federal crime scene, began backing away toward the heavy oak exit doors. No one wanted to be caught in the blast radius of this family's toxic implosion. They were watching a man verbally dig his own grave and hand the shovel directly to the authorities. David began shaking violently. He looked down at his trembling hands as if he could somehow see the invisible handcuffs already locked around his wrists. He tried to speak, tried to formulate some kind of defense, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He was a dead man, walking entirely ruined by his own staggering hubris. But the true danger did not come from me. It came from the shadows near the grand fireplace. Marcus had been standing in paralyzed silence, absorbing the reality of my foreclosure notice. But as my words about the flagged municipal pensions and the federal monitoring echoed through the air, a different kind of realization dawned on him. He realized that David's reckless, idiotic theft of those specific funds had just provided the federal investigators with the exact missing link they needed to tear down his entire fraudulent firm. David had not just ruined himself. He had handed the authorities the smoking gun to Marcus's entire criminal operation. The money trail was now complete, and it led directly back to him. A guttural roar of pure, unfiltered panic and rage ripped from Marcus's throat. He shoved past a terrified waiter, knocking a heavy silver tray to the ground with a deafening clatter. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, his face contorted into a mask of absolute desperation. He lunged across the polished marble floor, closing the distance between himself and my husband in 3 massive strides. Before David could even register the movement or attempt to defend himself, Marcus charged at him, reaching out with both hands and grabbing him violently by the collar. Marcus lunged across the polished marble floor, closing the distance between himself and my husband in 3 massive strides. He did not hesitate. His hands shot out like steel vices, grabbing handfuls of David's tailored lapels and slamming him brutally against the heavy stone masonry of the grand fireplace. The sickening thud of bone hitting rock echoed through the suddenly quiet room. David gasped for air, his perfectly polished loafers scrabbling for purchase on the floor as Marcus literally lifted him off the ground. "You absolute staggering moron!" Marcus roared, spittle flying into David's face. "You took the bait. You transferred flagged federal funds. You just handed the entire ledger directly to the authorities. You ruined me. You ruined everything." David squirmed frantically, his hands desperately clawing at Marcus's iron grip. The smug, untouchable veneer he had worn just moments ago was entirely obliterated. The arrogant financier was gone, replaced instantly by a sniveling, terrified coward facing the very real threat of a long prison sentence. He was sobbing, a high-pitched, panicked sound that cut through the tension. "You forced me to do it!" David shrieked, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings for every single person in the ballroom to hear. "You told me to cook the books. You said we needed a massive liquidity injection to hide the missing municipal pension money. You threatened to ruin my firm if I did not mask the transfers through my brokerage. It was your mandate, Marcus. It was your fraud. I was just following your orders. I told you to move clean." "Capital," Marcus screamed back, shaking David like a rag doll against the stone mantel. "I did not tell you to steal from a monitored federal honeypot. You led the feds right to my front door. You left a digital trail connecting my holding companies to the stolen pensions." They were openly, loudly confessing to massive federal crimes. The sheer stupidity of their panic was breathtaking. They were doing the federal prosecutors' jobs for them, laying out the exact mechanics of their vast financial conspiracy in front of a room packed with high society witnesses. They were so consumed by their own terror and self-preservation that they had completely forgotten they had an audience. The realization hit the remaining guests like a physical shockwave. The hushed murmurs erupted into a deafening cacophony of shouting and sheer panic. These were men and women who guarded their reputations and their portfolios with ruthless paranoia. They had just heard straight from the source that the hedge fund they had poured millions into was a massive hollow fraud built on stolen pensions and cooked books. They were implicated by association simply by being in the room. Arthur, the billionaire real estate developer who had been clapping Richard on the back just 20 minutes prior, turned completely white. He threw his crystal glass onto a passing catering cart and sprinted toward the grand foyer. He was already shouting furiously into his cell phone, demanding his legal team freeze all assets associated with Marcus and Richard immediately. The rest of the elite crowd followed suit. It was a stampede of silk diamonds and pure terror. Women in couture gowns shoved past each other, abandoning all pretense of upper-class etiquette. Men in bespoke tuxedos knocked over floral arrangements and completely trampled the velvet ropes in their desperate dash for the heavy oak exit doors. No one wanted to be in the room when the authorities finally arrived. They scrambled to distance themselves from the radioactive wreckage of my family. I stood motionless in the center of the emptying ballroom, watching the mass exodus. I did not move an inch. I simply watched the rats flee the sinking ship, stepping over the shattered remains of my father's manufactured legacy. Amidst the chaos of fleeing investors and the ongoing shouting match by the fireplace, Victoria finally mobilized. She did not rush to comfort her weeping mother. She did not attempt to stop her husband from strangling my husband. She had one single overriding priority, and as always, it was herself. She stumbled forward, her designer heels slipping on the spilled champagne covering the marble floor. She grabbed Marcus by the sleeve of his suit jacket, pulling at him frantically. Marcus, Victoria pleaded, her voice cutting through the noise with a shrill, desperate edge. Marcus, stop it. Look at me. Listen to me right now. Marcus jerked his arm away, still keeping his other hand firmly twisted into David's collar, but he turned his wild, bloodshot eyes toward his wife. What about my accounts? Victoria demanded, her face contorted with intense panic. The offshore trusts you set up for me, the yachts in the Mediterranean, my personal jewelry collection. Tell me they are safe. Tell me the feds cannot touch my personal assets. Tell me you protected my lifestyle. She was completely oblivious to the fact that the man she married was staring down the barrel of a 30-year federal sentence. She did not care that he was having a total psychological breakdown. She only cared about her diamonds and her status. The sheer narcissism of her demand hung in the air, vile and completely unhinged. Marcus stared at her, genuine revulsion breaking through his panic. He released his grip on David, letting the pathetic man slide down the stone fireplace to the floor, gasping and coughing for air. Marcus turned fully toward Victoria. Your lifestyle. Marcus spat, his voice laced with pure, unadulterated venom. Your yachts, your jewelry. They do not exist, Victoria. They are gone. Everything is gone. It was all bought with stolen money, and the feds will seize every last asset before the sun comes up. Victoria shook her head violently, refusing to accept the reality of her new impoverished existence. No. You promised me. You said my money was entirely insulated from your business. You said I would always be rich. You are broke! Marcus roared violently, shoving her away. Victoria stumbled backward, crashing hard onto the floor, her incredibly expensive gown soaking up the spilled champagne and dirt. You have absolutely nothing. You are a penniless liability, and I am going to federal prison because of your idiotic family. Victoria sat on the wet marble, her mouth open in a silent scream of absolute despair. Patricia was weeping hysterically near the abandoned stage, clutching her face. Richard was slumped in a chair, staring blankly at the wall, a thoroughly broken titan. David was coughing on the floor, and Marcus was pacing like a trapped animal waiting for the slaughter. The grand ballroom, once the ultimate symbol of their immense power and wealth, was now a hollow ruined shell. I looked up from the pathetic display of my family and turned my gaze toward the magnificent stained glass windows lining the front of the estate. Suddenly, brilliant flashes of red and blue light cut through the dark night, painting the intricate glass patterns with pulsing, frantic colors. The high, piercing wail of police sirens pierced the air, growing louder and more deafening by the second as a massive convoy of federal vehicles sped up the long, winding driveway. The heavy oak doors of the grand foyer did not just open, they were violently breached. A wave of men and women clad in dark tactical gear and navy windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the FBI and SEC flooded into the space. The sheer kinetic energy of the raid instantly paralyzed the remaining guests. The lead agents moved with brutal military precision. They fanned out across the marble floors, taking strategic positions at every exit, blocking the catering doors, the garden terraces, and the main entryway. There was no escape. The string quartet, who had been huddled in the corner clutching their instruments in sheer terror, dropped their bows. A stark, breathless silence fell over the ballroom, save for the heavy synchronized thud of combat boots marching across the imported rugs Patricia loved so much. The holiday gala, once a symbol of the Addams family's untouchable prestige, was officially a federal crime scene. I remained on the stage, stepping back slightly to give the authorities the absolute clearance they needed to do their jobs. I had spent 2 years cooperating with the prosecution, providing ledgers, decoding encrypted servers, and laying out the exact architecture of Marcus and David's criminal syndicate. Seeing the physical manifestation of my silent, painstaking work was exhilarating. A tall, sharp-featured lead agent with silver hair and an uncompromising stare marched directly toward the center of the ballroom. He did not care about the designer gowns, the crystal chandeliers, or the accumulated wealth of the room. He walked straight past Mayor Sterling, who was flattening himself against a marble pillar, and headed for the fireplace where Marcus still had David pinned against the stone. Marcus Sterling, the agent barked, his voice carrying the undeniable weight of federal authority. Let him go and put your hands where I can see them. Marcus froze, his knuckles white against David's collar. For a split second, the sheer arrogance that had defined his entire existence flared in his eyes. He looked at the agent with deep, ingrained contempt, completely accustomed to buying his way out of every inconvenience. Do you have any idea who I am? Marcus demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of fury and disbelief. I am personal friends with the governor. You cannot simply barge into my private family event. The lead agent did not even blink. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thick, sealed document. I am perfectly aware of who you are, Mr. Sterling, and as of this exact moment, this property is subject to federal seizure. The agent held up the paperwork, making sure the remaining investors in the room saw it clearly. I have warrants here for your immediate arrest on multiple federal charges, including grand larceny, systemic securities fraud, and racketeering. The words hung in the cold air, striking the final fatal blow to Marcus's empire. Grand larceny, racketeering. These were not white-collar fines or regulatory slaps on the wrist. These were federal statutes designed to dismantle organized crime syndicates. The investors who had not managed to flee were practically vibrating with panic, realizing the true devastating scale of the financial bloodbath they were currently standing in. Marcus dropped David's lapels, stepping back as if the fabric had caught fire. He shook his head, his meticulously styled hair falling into his wild, bloodshot eyes. You have nothing on me, Marcus spat, though his heaving chest betrayed his utter terror. My firm is entirely legitimate. You are acting on the hysterical lies of a bitter, low-level bookkeeper. He pointed a shaking finger at me, standing elevated on the stage. Just hours ago, this man had stood in this very room wearing a custom Italian suit, laughing condescendingly at my face. He had offered me a minimum-wage data entry job at his fraudulent firm, treating me like a pathetic, incompetent relative begging for a handout. Now the arrogant king of Seattle real estate was backed into a corner, stripped of his power, his wealth, and his dignity. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, the agent commanded, stepping into Marcus's personal space. Marcus shoved the agent's shoulder, a reflex of pure, unchecked entitlement. It was the worst mistake he could have possibly made. Within a fraction of a second, 2 additional agents swarmed him. They grabbed Marcus by the arms, spun him around with ruthless efficiency, and slammed his face directly into a nearby catering table. The loud crash of shattering crystal and snapping wood echoed sharply as Marcus's cheek hit the polished surface. The click of heavy metal handcuffs locking around his wrists sounded like a gunshot. Seeing his partner in crime violently subdued, David completely collapsed. The final shred of his smug, manipulative bravado dissolved into nothingness. My husband, the man who had stolen pensions, drained accounts, and slept with his secretary on my dime, dropped heavily to his knees on the wet marble floor. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking as he began to sob uncontrollably. It was a loud, wet, pathetic sound. He wept like a terrified child, realizing his entire life was over. The agents hauled Marcus up from the table, his nose bleeding and his designer suit ruined. As they began to march the disgraced Titan toward the grand double doors, David lifted his tear-streaked face from his hands. His eyes darted around the room, finding no sympathy, no allies, and no escape. The federal agents were already moving in to secure him, their handcuffs gleaming in the chandelier light. Then his desperate gaze locked onto me. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, ignoring the officers closing in around him. Dragging himself across the floor, David crawled directly to the edge of the stage and reached up frantically, grabbing the hem of my dress. His fingers dug frantically into the heavy silk of my skirt, his knuckles white with the sheer force of his terror. He pulled on the expensive fabric, desperate to anchor himself to the only person in the room who understood the full scope of the federal investigation. "Maya, please!" David choked out his voice, cracking into a high, hysterical whine that barely sounded human. His face was completely slick with sweat and tears, his perfectly styled hair plastered to his forehead. "You have to tell them. Tell them I was just a pawn. Tell them Marcus held my firm hostage. I was just following his orders to save our livelihood. We have 12 years of marriage, Maya. 12 long years of building a life together. You know the real me. You know I am not a criminal mastermind. You cannot let them take me away to a federal penitentiary. Please, Maya, I am begging you, have mercy." I stared down at the man who had promised to protect our family, the man who had instead chosen to gamble our daughter's future on a pathetic scheme to impress my toxic parents. He was weeping openly, snot and tears mixing on his face as he groveled at my feet in front of heavily armed federal agents. I searched my heart for any lingering trace of affection, any shred of pity, any ghost of the partnership we once shared. There was nothing but a cold, clinical void. I reached down, gripped the fabric of my dress, and violently ripped it out of his trembling hands. 12 years of marriage ended the second you told me to sleep in a motel, while my child sat in the freezing rain. I stated, my voice echoing with icy finality. You made your choices, David. Now you get to live in the cage you built. Enjoy the accommodations. He let out a loud, agonizing wail of pure despair as two broad-shouldered FBI agents finally reached the edge of the stage. They hauled him up by his armpits, twisting his wrists behind his back with practiced, ruthless efficiency. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked into place, snapping shut on his wrists. David did not fight them. His legs gave out completely, his knees dragging across the polished marble as the agents practically carried him toward the flashing lights waiting outside the grand double doors. Before the heavy oak doors even swung shut behind him, Patricia launched herself toward the stage. She moved with a frantic, disjointed energy, nearly tripping over the hem of her custom couture gown. Her carefully curated matriarchal elegance was completely destroyed. Her expensive diamond necklace sat crooked against her collarbone, her mascara was smeared in dark streaks down her cheeks, and her hands shook violently as she grabbed the edge of the wooden platform. "Maya, you have to stop this immediately!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical pitch. "You work for these people. You are one of them. You have high-level connections in the federal government. Call your superiors right now. Tell them this is all a massive misunderstanding. Tell them Richard is an innocent bystander. You can make this go away with one phone call. We are your family, Maya. We are your blood. You cannot just stand up there and watch them destroy us. You are destroying our family." Her voice grated against my ears, a grating reminder of decades of manipulation. Even now, facing total annihilation and federal indictments, she was still trying to issue commands. She still expected me to play the role of the dutiful, subservient scapegoat, swooping in to clean up their catastrophic mess. She genuinely believed the illusion of blood loyalty would compel me to commit federal obstruction of justice just to protect her lavish stolen lifestyle. I knelt down slowly, bringing my face level with hers. I wanted her to look directly into my eyes and understand that there was no negotiation, no hidden lifeline, and no last-minute rescue coming. I did not destroy our family. Patricia. I said my words dropping like stones into the quiet room. I just turned on the lights. And look at all the cockroaches scattering. Patricia recoiled violently, stumbling backward as if I had struck her across the face. She released her grip on the stage, backing into the empty space left by the fleeing investors. Her mouth opened, but her vocal cords failed her. The absolute finality of my words pierced straight through her impenetrable bubble of entitlement. She looked around the ruined ballroom, taking in the overturned catering tables, the crushed canapes ground into the Persian rugs, and the federal agents methodically bagging evidence from Marcus's makeshift gala office. The stark reality of her new, impoverished, disgraced existence finally crushed her. She collapsed into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands, and let out a long, haunting sob of pure, unfiltered defeat. Heavy, deliberate footsteps approached the stage from my right. I turned to see Agent Vance, the lead federal investigator I had been coordinating with for the past 6 agonizing months. He was a seasoned veteran who had dismantled dozens of white-collar syndicates, but as he surveyed the wreckage of the Christmas Eve gala, even he looked slightly impressed by the sheer magnitude of the evening's implosion. He bypassed the remaining chaos, walking directly up the small set of stairs to the platform where I stood. Agent Vance stopped in front of me and extended his right hand. It was a highly deliberate public gesture. He wanted everyone remaining in that room, from the terrified socialites pinned against the walls, to the uniformed officers securing the perimeter, to know exactly who was responsible for taking down the Adams empire. I took his hand, returning his firm professional grip. "Thank you for your service, Maya," Agent Vance said, his voice carrying the deep resonance of absolute respect. "Your forensic analysis was flawless. We could not have dismantled this operation without your evidence. You did an incredible job." "Thank you, Agent Vance," I replied, feeling a profound, heavy sense of closure wash over me. "It has been a long time coming." He nodded, releasing my hand and turning to bark orders at a tactical team securing the exit doors. I stood on the stage, taking a deep breath, ready to finally walk out of this house and return to my daughter. But before I could take a single step toward the stairs, a sudden blinding light flooded the ballroom. High above the grand staircase, the massive 90-inch television screen that Victoria had installed for her charity presentation suddenly clicked on. It had been dark all evening, waiting for a slideshow that would never happen. Now it blazed to life, casting a harsh artificial glow over the entire room. The sudden illumination caused the federal agents to pause, their hands resting cautiously on their duty weapons. The screen flickered for a fraction of a second before resolving into a crisp, high-definition broadcast. It was not a charity slideshow. It was a live feed from a major national news network, complete with a stark red breaking news banner flashing across the bottom of the screen. The volume wired through the ballroom's state-of-the-art surround sound system blasted through the space, demanding the absolute attention of every single person left in the house. The piercing blue and red lights flashing through the stained glass were entirely eclipsed by the sudden blinding glare of the 90-inch television screen. The volume blasted through the ballroom's state-of-the-art surround sound system, a system Victoria had personally selected to ensure her charity speeches could be heard in every corner of the estate. Now that same pristine audio delivered the exact instrument of her total destruction. The sharply dressed news anchor sat behind a polished desk, his expression grave, his perfectly modulated voice cutting through the whimpers of my mother and the frantic breathing of my husband. "We interrupt our holiday programming to bring you a major breaking news story out of the Seattle Financial District," the anchor announced, staring directly into the camera. Federal authorities, including a joint task force from the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission, have just dismantled a massive $500 million Ponzi scheme operating under the guise of the Sterling Investment Group. The screen cut from the anchor to a sweeping aerial shot of Marcus's gleaming downtown corporate headquarters. Then the visuals shifted. High-definition, professionally retouched headshots of Marcus Sterling and David filled the enormous screen. They were the exact same arrogant, smiling portraits they used for their corporate brochures, projecting trust, wealth, and unassailable integrity. The stark juxtaposition of those pristine images against the reality of the two men currently bleeding and handcuffed on the ruined marble floor was absolute poetry. The anchor continued, his voice ringing with journalistic finality. According to unsealed indictments, CEO Marcus Sterling and his lead broker, David, manipulated municipal pension funds, systematically draining the life savings of thousands of working-class citizens to fund a lavish, unchecked lifestyle of super yachts, offshore accounts, and luxury real estate. Authorities confirm that warrants for grand larceny, systemic securities fraud, and federal racketeering have been executed tonight. The broadcast was not just a news report, it was a public execution. The family was being forced to watch their golden reputation be publicly incinerated on live television. There was no spinning this. There was no PR firm expensive enough to scrub a $500 million federal racketeering charge from the front page of every newspaper in the world. I looked over at Victoria. She was completely paralyzed, kneeling in the puddle of spilled champagne and broken glass. The color had entirely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow wax figure. She was watching her entire universe evaporate frame by frame on that giant screen. Her identity was exclusively tied to her wealth, her status, and her unearned superiority. She was the woman who hosted $10 million charity galas, the woman who graced the covers of local society magazines, the untouchable queen of the Seattle elite. Now she was the wife of a disgraced federally indicted criminal. She realized with crushing clarity that her offshore accounts were frozen. Her designer wardrobe, her pristine estate, her Mediterranean vacations, all of it was built on stolen pension money. The government would seize everything down to the diamond earrings currently hanging from her earlobes. She would not just be poor. She would be a notorious, heavily publicized pariah. The elite friends she had spent years cultivating would instantly block her number. She was a toxic liability, a walking cautionary tale. Victoria let out a low, breathless gasp, her hands gripping her hair as she rocked back and forth on the floor, entirely broken by the sheer magnitude of her new reality. A few feet away, Patricia was faring no better. My mother stared at the television screen with wide, horrified eyes, her manicured hands clamped tightly over her mouth. For 40 years, Patricia had meticulously engineered her social standing. She had sacrificed every shred of human decency, including her relationship with her own daughter, upon the altar of high society. She had worshipped at the feet of the country club elite, measuring her worth by the invitations she received and the envious glances of her peers. The news broadcast was the definitive end of her existence. Patricia realized with absolute certainty that she would never step foot inside the country club again. The wealthy women she had gossiped with, the socialites she had desperately tried to impress, they would now feast on her ruin. They would whisper about the Addams family's disgrace over their mimosa brunches. Patricia would be a total outcast, exiled to the very poverty she had spent her entire life running away from. She slumped heavily against an overturned catering table. Her expensive gown ruined her social empire, reduced to ashes. Richard did not even look up at the screen. He remained in his chair, a hollowed-out shell of a man who had bet his entire legacy on a fraud and lost everything. David, still restrained by the two federal agents, was actively sobbing. The sight of his own face on the breaking news broadcast, explicitly named as a co-conspirator in a $500 million federal crime, shattered his last remaining delusion of survival. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head violently, as if he could simply deny the broadcast out of existence. He was a pathetic, sniveling mess, entirely stripped of the arrogant cruelty he had wielded against me for a decade. The federal agents in the room watched the broadcast in stoic silence, their presence validating every single word spoken by the anchor. The perimeter was entirely locked down. There was nowhere for the rats to run. On the massive screen, the news anchor adjusted his notes, his expression shifting to one of intense professional curiosity. The sudden catastrophic collapse of this criminal empire, which operated undetected for nearly a decade, was not the result of a routine audit, the anchor revealed, leaning slightly toward the camera. Sources inside the Justice Department have just confirmed that this unprecedented federal raid was made possible by an anonymous whistleblower. The words hung in the heavy, silent air of the ballroom. According to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the anchor continued, his voice echoing over the quiet sobs of my mother and sister. This highly placed informant spent 2 years meticulously gathering encrypted ledgers, tracking offshore wire transfers, and building a flawless forensic case against the Sterling Investment Group. Because the recovered assets exceed $500 million, this anonymous whistleblower is officially set to receive a historic record-breaking financial reward under the federal bounty program, estimated to be upwards of $50 million. The anchor's voice continued crisp and relentless, filling the shattered ballroom with facts and figures that sounded like a death knell for the Sterling family. Under the Securities and Exchange Commission's whistleblower program, the anchor explained individuals who provide original, timely, and credible information, leading to a successful enforcement action, are legally entitled to between 10 and 30% of the total monetary sanctions collected. The federal government has seized over $500 million in assets tonight. Given the unprecedented scale and the flawless nature of the evidence provided, the SEC has authorized an immediate maximum tier payout. This $50 million reward stands as one of the largest single payouts in the history of federal financial regulation. $50 million. The number reverberated off the vaulted ceilings and the crystal chandelier suspending itself in the frigid air above the ruined Persian rugs and the cowering socialites. It was a sum of money that defied the comprehension of ordinary people. It was generation-altering wealth. It was absolute, untouchable power. For a long, agonizing moment, the grand ballroom remained frozen in a state of collective shock. The air was thick with the smell of spilled wine, expensive perfume, and raw fear. Then, like a slow-moving tide, every single pair of eyes in the grand foyer began to shift. They moved away from the blazing television screen. They moved past the handcuffed, weeping form of David being dragged toward the doors. They moved past Marcus, whose bleeding face was pressed against the cold marble floor by federal combat boots. Every gaze in the room slowly, deliberately turned toward the stage. They turned toward me. The collective realization hit the remaining crowd with the kinetic force of a runaway freight train. The puzzle pieces rapidly snapped together in their minds. They remembered Agent Vance stepping onto the platform just moments ago. They remembered his loud public declaration of respect, honoring my flawless forensic analysis. I was not just a disgruntled family member causing a scene. I was not a bitter, low-level bookkeeper as Marcus had so arrogantly claimed. I was the architect of their total destruction. I was the anonymous whistleblower. And as of tonight, I was incredibly independently wealthy. David, still in the iron grip of the FBI agents, twisted his neck to stare back at me. His bloodshot eyes bulged from their sockets. The man who had mocked my meager salary, who had cheated on me in our own home, who had treated me like a pathetic dependent liability, was now staring at a woman who possessed a personal fortune that dwarfed his wildest, most criminal ambitions. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg one final time, but only a strangled, pathetic wheeze escaped his throat. The agents shoved him through the heavy oak doors, dragging him out into the flashing red and blue lights of the transport vans, leaving him to rot in federal custody. Victoria looked as though she had been physically struck by a speeding vehicle. She remained on the floor, her hands gripping the ruined fabric of her designer dress. Her entire life had been defined by a desperate, clawing need to be superior to me. She had spent decades parading her stolen wealth in my face, mocking my modest apartment, sneering at my lack of designer labels, and reveling in her position as the golden, wealthy daughter. Now, in the span of a single news broadcast, she was entirely bankrupt. She was facing a mountain of legal debt and severe federal scrutiny, while I stood elevated above her as a verified, legitimate multimillionaire. The staggering irony short-circuited her brain. She let out a soft, hysterical giggle, a sound entirely devoid of sanity, and curled into a tight, trembling ball on the marble floor. Richard stood frozen near the fireplace. My father, the man who had always valued net worth over human connection, who had repeatedly told me I lacked the aggressive instinct to succeed in the real world, looked up at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. It was the exact look he used to reserve exclusively for billionaires and politicians. The realization that his scapegoat daughter had just executed the most lucrative, masterful financial maneuver in the history of the family completely paralyzed him. He could not speak. He could not move. He just stared. But it was Patricia whose reaction was the most profound. My mother had spent 35 years meticulously ensuring I felt small, inadequate, and financially inferior. She had wielded her wealth like a weapon, using it to control, humiliate, and isolate me. She had literally laughed in my face when I refused to take part in their fraudulent empire, calling me a naive, useless idealist who would die penniless and alone. She had called me a loser. She had called me a disappointment. She had built her entire maternal identity on the premise that she was the powerful matriarch and I was the pathetic outcast. Deep inside my clutch, my cell phone vibrated with a sharp, sustained buzz. I did not break eye contact with Patricia as I snapped the small designer bag open and withdrew the phone. The screen illuminated my face in the dim, chaotic lighting of the ballroom. It was a highly secure encrypted notification from my federal financial liaison. The specialized routing process, authorized directly by the highest levels of the Justice Department, had been expedited due to the high-profile nature of the raid. I tapped the screen opening the secure banking application. The balance stared back at me in stark, indisputable black and white. A massive 9-figure sum. Legitimate, untaxed, and permanently mine. I walked slowly down the short wooden steps of the stage, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. The federal agents parted seamlessly to let me through, treating me with a deference my family had never once shown me. I walked directly over to where Patricia was leaning heavily against an overturned catering table. She looked up at me, her face pale and drawn, her chest heaving as she struggled to draw breath into her lungs. I held the phone out, turning the screen so she could see it perfectly. The glowing numbers reflected in her wide, terrified eyes. "Looks like the wire just cleared," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. $50 million, clean, legal, and entirely out of your reach. And entirely out. Patricia stared at the screen. She blinked once, then twice, as if hoping the glowing numbers would simply disappear into the ether. They did not. The sheer, incomprehensible magnitude of the wealth combined with the total permanent loss of her own completely broke her mind. Her legs gave out entirely, and she dropped heavily to her knees. The sickening thud of my mother's knees hitting the marble floor echoed through the silence of the room. Patricia stared up at me, her eyes darting frantically from the glowing 9-figure bank balance on my phone screen to my face. The absolute certainty of her financial ruin warred against a lifetime of narcissistic survival instincts. I watched the exact second her brain rebooted. The imperious, cruel matriarch died on that floor, instantly replaced by a pathetic, groveling sycophant desperate to secure a lifeline. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, her expensive designer gown bunching up around her legs. She reached out with trembling, desperate hands and wrapped her fingers around my ankles, much like David had done just moments prior. "Maya, my sweet girl." Patricia wept, her voice dripping with a sickly, manufactured affection that made my stomach turn. "We can be a family again. We can share this. We are your parents. We raised you. We always knew you were destined for greatness. This is a blessing for all of us. We can put the past behind us and build a beautiful new life together. You have enough money to save the estate. You can save us, Maya. You can pay off the debts. We will treat you with the respect you deserve. We will make you the head of the family trust. Please look at your mother. I am begging you." Her words were a masterclass in delusion. She was completely ignoring the federal agents, the shattered glass, and the decades of relentless emotional abuse she had inflicted upon me. She honestly believed she could simply flip a switch, play the role of a loving mother, and gain access to a $50 million federal bounty. I stared down at her tear-stained face, feeling absolutely nothing. The woman who had routinely mocked my clothing, my career, and my very existence was now begging for my charity. She expected me to fund the very lifestyle that had been used to torture me. I stepped back, forcing her to drop her hands from my ankles. I looked at her with surgical precision, dissecting her pathetic display without a single ounce of empathy. "I do not have parents," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs like a scalpel. "I have tenants who are currently in default." Patricia gasped, her breath catching in her throat as the implication of my words slammed into her. During my meticulous forensic investigation into Marcus's firm, I had uncovered the heavily leveraged mortgages tied to this exact estate. They had borrowed against the house to fund their lavish lifestyle, using fraudulent assets as collateral. The moment the federal indictments hit, those loans went into immediate default. And through a series of anonymous, perfectly legal holding companies I had established months ago, I had purchased the debt for pennies on the dollar. The mansion they prized above all else, the ultimate symbol of their elite status, the very room we were standing in, legally belonged to me. "You have 48 hours to vacate my property," I continued, my tone flat and uncompromising. "Leave the keys on the kitchen island. Do not attempt to take any of the fixtures or the artwork. It is all being seized by the federal government or liquidated to cover your remaining balances." A high, piercing shriek suddenly ripped through the ballroom, shattering the icy standoff. Victoria had finally snapped. Her fragile, carefully constructed identity as the golden child, the untouchable socialite, had completely disintegrated. The sheer weight of the humiliation, combined with the reality of my sudden staggering wealth, broke her mind in two. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes wild and unfocused, her perfectly styled hair sticking to her tear-streaked face. "Lies!" Victoria screamed, her voice cracking into a terrifying guttural howl. "It is all lies. She is a loser. She is nothing. I am the sterling daughter. I am the one who belongs here. I am the one everyone loves." She grabbed a half-empty crystal champagne flute from a nearby table and hurled it directly at the massive television screen, which was still broadcasting the breaking news of her husband's federal indictment. The glass shattered violently against the screen, raining sparkling shards across the floor, but the broadcast continued uninterrupted. Victoria grabbed another glass, then a heavy silver serving tray, launching them indiscriminately at the television, the walls, and the federal agents. "I am Victoria Sterling!" she shrieked, tearing at the bodice of her couture gown until the expensive silk ripped. "You cannot do this to me. I am on the board of directors. I am a philanthropist. You are ruining my gala. Stop looking at me. Stop filming me." She lunged toward the uniformed officers, waving her arms in pure, unchecked madness. She was completely disconnected from reality, trapped in a psychotic break where she was still the queen of Seattle society instead of a ruined, disgraced fraud. She tried to order the FBI agents out of the room as if they were disobedient catering staff. 2 agents immediately moved to intercept her, but she fought them with the frantic, chaotic strength of a wild animal, scratching and kicking, while screaming her own name over and over again. Agent Vance signaled to the medical personnel waiting in the foyer. Within seconds, a team of paramedics rushed into the ballroom. They moved with practiced efficiency, securing Victoria's flailing arms and strapping her to a transport gurney. She thrashed against the heavy nylon straps, spitting and sobbing, her golden child persona entirely replaced by a terrifying display of psychiatric collapse. The paramedics swiftly administered a sedative, and Victoria's shriek slowly faded into a low, incoherent mumbling as they wheeled her out of the room for an involuntary psychiatric hold. Patricia remained frozen on the floor, watching her golden daughter being strapped to a gurney and wheeled away like a mental patient. The total destruction of her perfect family was absolute. She covered her ears and curled into a tight, trembling ball, rocking back and forth on the ruined marble. I turned away from the pathetic display, adjusting the strap of my purse. The suffocating grip this family had held over me for my entire life was completely gone. I was finally free. As I walked toward the grand entryway, the heavy double doors were thrown wide open, revealing the chaotic scene outside. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the grand driveway, casting harsh shadows across the manicured lawns. A swarm of local and national press had already breached the perimeter gates, their camera flashes creating a blinding, continuous strobe light effect against the dark night sky. Through the center of the media circus, federal agents began leading David and Marcus out the front doors in a humiliating, highly publicized perp walk. The heavy double doors remained pinned open, framing the ultimate downfall of the Sterling Investment Group against the dark winter sky. Outside, the freezing air was thick with the frenzied shouts of local reporters and national correspondents who had caught wind of the unprecedented federal raid. The strobe effect of 100 camera flashes illuminated the grand driveway like a twisted, humiliating red carpet. Marcus Sterling, the untouchable titan of Seattle real estate, was practically dragged down his own front steps by two heavily armed FBI agents. He ducked his chin, desperately trying to shield his bruised, bleeding face from the relentless glare of the television lenses. His custom-tailored Italian suit was torn and stained, a physical manifestation of his ruined, fraudulent empire. Reporters hurled questions like daggers demanding to know where the municipal pension funds went, demanding an explanation for the $500 million theft that would devastate thousands of working-class families. Marcus offered nothing but a cowardly, stony silence as the agents shoved him into the back of a heavily armored transport van. Right behind him came David. If Marcus was trying to maintain a shred of stoic defiance, my soon-to-be ex-husband had completely surrendered to his terror. David was openly hyperventilating, his knees buckling with every step he took across the wet pavement. The flashing blue and red lights washed over his pale, tear-slicked face. A news microphone was shoved directly into his path, and David actually recoiled, letting out a pathetic yelp as he tried to hide behind the broad shoulders of the federal agent escorting him. The cameras captured every second of his absolute cowardice. It was a live broadcast of his permanent destruction, a digital footprint of humiliation that would follow him for the rest of his life. The heavy steel doors of the transport van slammed shut, swallowing both men into the dark, unforgiving reality of the federal justice system. I watched the vans tear out of the driveway, their sirens wailing into the night, before turning my attention back to the interior of the foyer. The grand house felt entirely different now. It was no longer a fortress of generational wealth designed to intimidate and belittle outsiders. It was an active crime scene, and more importantly, it was mine. I reached into my bag one final time. My fingers bypassed the encrypted phone and retrieved a crisp manila folder. I walked purposefully toward Richard and Patricia. My mother was still slumped against the overturned catering table, her breath hitching in shallow, erratic gasps. Her eyes were vacant, completely shattered by the realization that her social standing had been vaporized. Richard had finally moved from his frozen stance by the fireplace, crossing the marble floor to stand beside his ruined wife. He looked at the folder in my hand with a deep, instinctive dread. I held the document out, forcing Richard to take it. He hesitated, his hands trembling slightly before accepting the heavy stock paper. He opened the folder, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. "What is this?" Richard demanded, his voice entirely lacking its usual booming patriarchal authority. It sounded thin, reedy, and exhausted. "It is a formal, legally binding eviction notice," I stated, my voice echoing clearly in the cavernous foyer. "As the new legal owner of this estate, I am executing my right to reclaim the property immediately. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises. My private security team is already stationed at the perimeter. They will be moving inside momentarily to monitor your every move. They are explicitly instructed to ensure you do not attempt to take any of the custom fixtures, the imported rugs, or the artwork. You may take your clothing and your toiletries. Everything else stays." Patricia let out a strangled gasp, clutching the bodice of her ruined gown. "Maya, you cannot do this," she pleaded, the syrupy manipulation entirely gone, replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. "We have nowhere to go. All of our accounts are frozen. The credit cards are declining. You cannot throw your own mother out into the street. We will freeze. We will starve." I looked down at her, feeling a profound, absolute sense of peace. "You can book a room at the budget motel on Interstate 5, I suggested calmly. "It is the exact same one you told me to sleep in while my daughter sat in the freezing rain." I hear they offer a complimentary continental breakfast. You will survive. The sheer coldness of my response finally ignited a spark of defensive rage in Richard. He dropped the eviction notice onto the floor, stepping forward to draw himself up to his full height. He tried to project the commanding dominance he had used to control me for my entire life. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, his jaw tight with fury. You are a monster, Maya. Richard spat, his face flushing a deep mottled red. You are a cold, calculated monster. No daughter does this to her flesh and blood. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head, and you orchestrate our total destruction just to line your own pockets. You are ruthless. You have no heart. I did not flinch. I did not step back. The words that used to terrify me as a child now sounded like the meaningless ramblings of a defeated old man. I met his furious glare with a smile of absolute surgical precision. No, Richard, I said softly, ensuring every syllable landed with devastating impact. I am not a monster. I am just the auditor, and your accounts are empty. Richard's arm dropped heavily to his side, the final spark of his resistance snuffed out by the undeniable truth of my words. He looked around the ruined ballroom, taking in the shattered crystal, the FBI evidence markers, and the total evaporation of his legacy. I did not wait for another response. I turned my back on the people who had spent a lifetime trying to break me. I walked confidently across the marble floor, my heels echoing in the quiet space, and stepped through the grand front doors. The winter air hit my face crisp and incredibly clean. Snow had just begun to fall, dusting the driveway in a pristine, untouched layer of white. I walked out into the freezing night, leaving them trapped forever in the ruins of their own making. The crisp, clean snow crunched loudly beneath my designer boots as I walked down the sweeping circular driveway of the Sterling estate. Behind me, the muffled shouts of my parents, the chaotic radio chatter of federal agents, and the harsh glare of police sirens faded into the freezing winter night. I did not look back. For the first time in 35 years, my lungs filled with air that did not taste like obligation, fear, or relentless inadequacy. I climbed into the back of the waiting black town car, gave the driver a silent nod, and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Richard and Patricia entirely alone in the spectacular ruins of their own making. 6 months later, that freezing Seattle night felt like an entirely different lifetime, a dark nightmare that had finally lost its power to haunt me. The morning sun poured across the expansive wrap-around balcony of my new coastal estate in Monterey, California. A warm, salty ocean breeze ruffled the sheer white curtains, framing the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room. I leaned against the wrought iron railing, holding a steaming mug of black coffee, and listened to the rhythmic, soothing sound of waves crashing against the jagged cliffs below. A few feet away, my daughter Chloe sat cross-legged on a plush, vibrantly patterned outdoor rug. She held a wooden palette smeared with bright, joyful colors, her small hands working a paintbrush across a large canvas propped on a wooden easel. She was humming a cheerful, upbeat melody, her face illuminated by the golden morning light. The nervous shadows that used to haunt her eyes back in the sterile, oppressive halls of the Sterling mansion were completely gone. She was thriving, safe, and entirely secure in a home built on truth, hard work, and unconditional love, rather than fraudulent prestige and emotional manipulation. I watched a streak of bright yellow paint catch the tip of her nose, and a genuine, unburdened smile spread across my face. My phone buzzed on the patio table, displaying a news alert. I tapped the screen, scrolling through the morning headlines. The federal justice system had moved with terrifying efficient speed. Federal prosecutors do not offer plea deals or leniency to arrogant men who steal $500 million in municipal pension funds from working-class families. David and Marcus were currently sharing a cramped, windowless concrete cell in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The news article featured a recent courtroom sketch of my ex-husband. David looked hollowed out, his posture severely stooped, his trademark arrogant smirk replaced by the dull, vacant, terrified stare of a man facing 25 years without the possibility of parole. Marcus had seemingly aged 2 decades in the span of 6 months. The once untouchable vicious titans of Seattle real estate were now just anonymous inmate numbers wearing ill-fitting orange jumpsuits, scrubbing cafeteria trays for pennies an hour under the watchful eyes of armed guards. My highly paid private investigator still sent me weekly detailed updates, a small luxury I allowed myself just to ensure my perimeter remained absolutely secure. The dossier on Victoria was almost poetic in its brutal irony. Following her involuntary psychiatric hold and subsequent release, she emerged into a stark, unforgiving reality where all her accounts were permanently seized and her elite social circle had completely evaporated. The woman who once threw a glass of vintage champagne at a catering maid for bringing the wrong vintage was now working a cash register at a discount retail outlet in a rundown suburban strip mall. The investigator had included a candid photograph. Victoria stood behind a scuffed laminate counter, wearing a highly unflattering, poorly fitted polyester uniform, her face tight with suppressed, agonizing rage as a customer loudly berated her over an expired coupon. Her designer wardrobe, her diamonds, and her sports cars had all been auctioned off by the bankruptcy courts. She had absolutely nothing left but minimum wage checks and daily public humiliation. As for my parents, the federal seizure of their assets had been absolute and merciless. Richard and Patricia now resided in a tiny, cramped, poorly ventilated one-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of Tacoma. The investigators' audio transcripts painted a grim, incredibly satisfying picture of their new existence. The thin walls of their cheap complex offered zero privacy. They spent their days trapped in a few hundred square feet of peeling linoleum, constantly and viciously bickering with one another. Richard blamed Patricia for raising a traitorous daughter who destroyed them. Patricia blamed Richard for his sloppy, arrogant financial oversight that led the FBI directly to their door. Without their stolen wealth to insulate them from their own toxic personalities, their marriage had devolved into an inescapable prison of mutual resentment. They were dining on generic canned soup and choking on their own bitter regret. The sharp, distinctive ring of my encrypted Federal Liaison phone pulled me from my thoughts. I set my coffee mug on the glass patio table and picked up the device. Maya. The voice on the other end was deep and commanding. It was Director Vance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation calling directly from Washington. I hope the California sun is treating you well today. It is absolutely perfect, Director, I replied, keeping my tone professional but warm. What can I do for you this morning? I am calling to formally offer you a highly classified position, Vance said, his voice crackling slightly over the secure line. The asset forfeiture from the Sterling raid was the cleanest, most efficient, and most profitable operation we have seen in a decade. Your forensic auditing skills are entirely unparalleled. I have received authorization from the highest levels of the Justice Department to create a new elite financial crimes task force operating directly under my command. We are going to target the exact same breed of untouchable white-collar parasites that your family represented. I want you to head the division as the lead forensic director. You name your salary, you build your own team, you write your own rules. I looked out at the vast, endless expanse of the blue Pacific Ocean. I thought about the decades I had spent being told I was a loser, a disappointment, an ugly dependent burden who completely lacked the killer instinct to survive in the real world. I had dismantled a massive criminal empire from the inside out, seized $50 million in federal reward money, and secured a brilliant, untouchable future for my daughter. I accept the position, Director, I said without a single second of hesitation. Send the official paperwork to my secure server. I will start assembling my team on Monday morning. Excellent, Vance replied, a heavy hint of satisfaction in his voice. Welcome aboard, Maya. We are going to do great things. I ended the call and slipped the heavy encrypted phone into the pocket of my silk robe. I picked my coffee mug back up and walked slowly over to where Chloe was painting. She held up her canvas, revealing a messy, vibrant picture of a bright yellow sun rising over a sweeping blue ocean. Do you like it, Mommy? She asked, her big eyes shining with innocent hope and pure joy. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my entire life, I told her, crouching down to press a soft kiss against her forehead. True security and inner peace never come from the conditional approval of a toxic family. When people who are supposed to protect you instead choose to diminish your achievements and exploit your vulnerabilities, the most powerful response is simply walking away to build your own empire. You do not need to prove your value to those committed to misunderstanding you. Real strength lies in establishing firm boundaries, claiming your independence, and defining success entirely on your own terms. Please take a powerful moment today to reflect on your own personal healing journey and share your story in the comments below.